Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Bruce Olav Solheim. He earned his PhD in history from Bowling Green State University in 1993. He is a distinguished professor of history at Citrus College in Glendora, California. He has published 9 books and has written 10 plays, 2 of which have been produced. He has published 3 paranormal books, Timeless, Timeless Deja Vu, and his latest, Timeless Trinity. He teaches a popular paranormal personal history course at Citrus College and has his own radio program and has appeared on many radio programs. He is also an associate member of the Parapsychological Association, a member of Suro, and MUFON. Bruce, welcome. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Chris. Based on the circumstances, doing fairly well.
Yes, based on
How are you? How are you?
I am the same. I'm staying in good spirits based on everything. But tonight, I'm looking forward to it. And if you've listened to my show for any period of time, that you know that I love having guests on that can connect the paranormal with UFOs and consciousness. And I believe it's all connected in some way. And I believe there are entire realms just beyond the spectrum of our vision. Tonight, we'll be discussing exactly that. We'll be discussing your personal experiences, Bruce, and your research. But first, I'd like to start off with a little bit more of your background and, what brought you down your current path.
Well, so I'm 61 years old, and all of this started when I was 4. In 1962, I had my first paranormal experience. And that really opened up the world beyond the world that we see every day. And it was a healing experience. It was an angelic experience. It was in northern Norway on an island 200 miles above the Arctic Circle, very remote island where my parents are from. We were visiting my grandmother. I got very, very ill. I mean, extremely ill, to the point where they thought I was going to die. And in the middle of the night, I woke up because I was sleeping in this little bed in my grandmother's kitchen because she was very old and had a bad leg, so she couldn't go up the steep stairs, so she'd sleep sometimes in the kitchen. I fell asleep there, and when I woke up, there was a bright light above me, a presence, a warming presence. And I realized when I saw that and felt that I was going to be okay. And it took away all my fear and my nervousness, and I went to sleep. And when I woke up in the next morning, because my parents just let me sleep there because I was so sick, I was completely healed. I was completely fine. And my mother and my grandmother said that it was a miracle and that it was a guardian angel that would be with me for the rest of my life, an angelic presence. So I believed them, and I knew what happened to me. And I took it to heart, and I think that's what opened everything to me, because once that happened, once you go through that door, it's with you for the rest of your life. So then things kept happening to me randomly but frequently. And my mother was very psychic, so we would do little experiments like with cards. We'd read each other's minds, telepathy. We would do it until my father got upset and told us to stop because it made him very nervous. He didn't like that kind of stuff. So I had so many different experiences. I had a near-death experience when I was 8, and I had, went to an open casket funeral, and the person in the casket spoke to me. So I mean, this just happened all the time, and I didn't understand it. I thought maybe it happened to everybody, and maybe just people didn't like to talk about it. And my mom didn't really want me to talk about it to other people. I remember I could talk to her about it. Like when that experience, when I heard the person in the coffin speaking, I looked at her and she kind of winked at me, and she didn't say anything because my dad was sitting right next to her. So it was kind of our secret. So I grew up with that very paranormal life. And it really wasn't until, so my whole life I had all these things happen. And then 2016, a dear friend of mine passed away, also Norwegian American from Seattle, and his name was Gene. He passed away, and about a month after he died, he came to me in a vision. And in that vision, as clear as you and I are seeing each other now, through this miracle of the internet. I saw him, and he told me that of what it was like being on the other side. And he gave me a lot of insights. Like, for instance, he said, there's no past, there's no future. It's all the eternal now. It's just all happening at once. And he also told me it was time for me to write my stories and tell my stories and show people what had happened to me and try to explain it. And he even gave me the title of the trilogy, Timeless. He gave me the title. So I ventured to, I was afraid because I'm a tenured professor of history. I've been teaching for a very long time, 28 years. I was afraid that my colleagues would think I was nuts because I'd always just kind of kept it hidden, except certain people I would tell, you know. But there I was, sticking myself out there, and a very good reception. I had no reason to really be afraid because everybody accepted it. And yeah, so they even allowed, then I thought I'd go one step further and ask if I could teach a paranormal class, and they said that was cool. Got approved all the way up to the Board of Trustees, which was amazing. Nobody was more surprised than me when they allowed me to do that. And the students are great. I've been teaching it for 1.5 years now. And although this semester got canceled, right? Because all colleges are, were closed. But every semester, great students, anywhere from 15 to 25 students of all ages. I have older students, younger students. All of them are there for one reason. The main reason is because it's a safe place for them to share their stories and try to make some sense of it. And that's what we're all trying to do, myself included.
Yes, very good. Now, I want to go back through some of your experiences you had.
Yeah.
Starting with the first one that kind of opened you up to everything.
Yeah.
Said that this presence felt like an angelic presence, or more of a spirit guide.
I would say it was more angelic because now, now that I've thought it all the way through and really delved into this, I have a name. It's my well, she is angelic. She's my spirit guide named Theodora. I know her name now. I didn't know at the time, and now that I've kind of figured it out. So, but she is an angelic-looking, a female character. She has wings. She's angelic. And I have another spirit, what I would call a spirit guide too, that helps me when I do my mediumship. And I call him Ozzy. People usually think of Ozzy Osbourne. It seems like an odd spirit guide to have, but maybe not. Maybe that's pretty cool. But he is very silent. He doesn't say anything. He's kind of like, I would compare him to a bouncer at a bar. He keeps me safe when I do my mediumship. So both of them do, but in different ways. One guides me, the other protects me. So, yeah. So anyway, that's when I first encountered her, and then she's been with me my whole life, and so is Ozzy. And it, like I said, in 2016, I acknowledged it, and I began to learn how to. I never say control because I don't think you ever control this stuff. I think I've learned to manage it so that I can turn it on and off. Turning it off is just as important as learning how to turn it on, so you can sleep at night, so you can rest, so you can go to parties and not be bothered by people's, thoughts and say you don't want to know all this stuff. It's just too noisy. So, in a psychic level, so you have to learn how to turn it off, and that's kind of what I've learned. I've been really learning in the last 4 years since the experience with Gene.
You mentioned you had a near-death experience. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was when I was 8 years old. It was in Washington State because I was born in Seattle. And we were at Deception Pass, which is a great name for a paranormal event to happen at Deception Pass, right? And it was on this little island that was between these two bridges. And we parked there, and I was running around these trails. And in those days, in the early 60s, there weren't any safety barriers, and there was this trail that kind of led to this cliff. Well, my conscious memory is that I ran down that trail and and just ran right off that cliff. And then what happens is that I don't remember falling to the bottom, and it was like 200 feet to the rocks and the narrow channel that kind of dumps the ocean goes from the Straits of Juan de Fuca into the interior part there in Puget Sound, sheer, just certain death. I didn't fall though. I kind of hovered in midair, and the next thing you know, I don't even know how much time took place. Maybe it was instantly. I was back on the trail, and my dad had me by the shoulders and was shaking me and just yelling at me. He was so mad. So my parents never wanted to talk about it. I tried to talk to them about it. They did not want to talk about it. So I think that what I've determined from this and other experiences that I've had is that we hit what I call a fork kind of a fork in the road of life. And in one fork, I died. I fell off that cliff due to my own carelessness while I was a young kid. And in the other fork, I lived on. So I think that's what happened. I think there's many of these forks. And I've had.
Do you say that's like multiple timelines that we can actually alter with our decisions and certain factors?
Yeah. So, I mean, both are equally true. I'm living this one where I did not die. But there's been other instances too where I've even more pronounced, like something that happened to me a year and a half ago with my youngest son and I here in Southern California. We were driving in my truck and we came to an intersection. I looked down just briefly, and it doesn't take long for something bad to happen. I just looked down briefly. I don't know what it was, and I looked up, and the light had turned red, and two cars, and I was going 50 miles an hour, and two cars were coming from either side at 50 miles an hour. So we would have been double T-boned, if that makes sense, from the right and the left. But suddenly, time completely slowed down where it was just in slow motion, and I was able to steer and accelerate and somehow thread that needle between these two cars coming right at us, scissoring us or whatever you want to call that, double T-bone, right? And then as soon as we got to the other side of the intersection, time sped up again to normal speed. And I think that was a glimpse, that was a hint for me that this is what happens when you reach this fork in the road of life, that in one, it was a terrible accident and maybe people would have died or at least been very seriously injured. But in the other, I was able to maneuver through it. So it tells me, it gave me this clue about what you were talking about at the outset there, that when we started, that really the quantum world, the spirit world, and the alien world are all the same. I think it's all the same thing. And I think that's the secret to it, that they're, and if you look at people that see apparitions or ghosts or whatever, they'll see them go through walls and appear and disappear, phase in, phase out, whatever terminology you want to use. And then when you hear experiencers or people that have been abducted or contacted by aliens do the same thing. They phase in, they phase out, they go through windows, they go through walls. Well, that's a clue right there, that they're able to transcend these realities. And that gave me a clue. And then so I started studying quantum physics. I'm a historian, so I'm not a physicist, obviously, but I love it. And it just started to make sense to me. And then I read about these physicists who think very much along the same lines. And I thought, okay, I'm onto something here. This is something. And it is a something. And I think that like you said, when you said that at the beginning of the show, I thought, yeah, exactly. That's what it is. It's all the same thing.
Now, speaking of otherworldly beings and possibly interdimensional, whatever you want to call it, you were actually warned about I guess you could say a sexual predator by another worldly being. That's a fascinating story. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, that was, 1964. So I was 6 years old. There was these people that lived above us. We lived kind of on a hillside in Seattle, north end of Lake Washington. And the people that lived above us were also of Norwegian extraction. So my parents, because they were the same ethnicity, they thought, okay, they can trust these people. So they would babysit me occasionally. And this guy, there was something weird about him. You know, the wife was always gone. She was some kind of business lady. She was always gone. So he was home alone with his children. I think they had 3 of them. And then all these neighborhood kids were there. And then I was there being babysat. Well, he would do things like he would play hide and seek, but it wasn't like we played hide and seek when we were kids. He would go hide in a closet and close the door. And then we were supposed to come in and find him, even though we knew where he was, and close the door and be in this dark closet with him. Well, I refused to do it because I just thought there's something weird about that. It doesn't, plus he acted like a little kid, and adults that act like little kids, there's something kind of weird about it. And then I also remembered that he used to give us little Dixie cups with what he said was Kool-Aid, but it didn't smell like Kool-Aid. Now I know it was alcohol. I didn't know at the time. I just said, this doesn't smell right. And I mean, ever since then, I don't like to take any drinks that I'm given. I got to pour it myself. It's just a weird thing. I also don't like closets too, just so you know. But anyway, so I knew something was going on. I was looking out the back window of my my bedroom, and I always kind of had the fear of the backyard that leads up to where these people live, and especially at night. And then there were some lights. There were some lights there, and I was afraid of those lights, but also I was compelled to want to explore it more. And it was then that I met this this being. You know, at the time I didn't know who he was or what he was. I knew he was unusual looking because he was very tall. He was kind of bluish gray. He had slanted eyes and kind of an upside down tear shaped, you know, like a tear, but upside down with slanted eyes. Not the big bug eyes, but like slanted, you know, big slanted eyes. And I didn't know his name, but he was communicating with me, and he said that the guy in that house up there was a bad man, and that I shouldn't go there anymore. And and there were other kids with me. I remember this. There were other kids with me, and they were afraid of this alien being. Now I know it's an alien being. And they said, "How do we know you're not the bad man? You look like a bad man." And he said, because the other guy looked like a normal guy, you know, just a human being, right? And I remember he told me, he said, "What do you say? You say you can't judge a book by its cover. Even though I look scary, I'm not the bad one. He's the bad one." And he said, "You should tell your parents about him." And I said, "Well, you know, can I tell them about you?" And he said, "Yeah, but they probably won't believe it, but they will believe you about the bad man." So I never got a chance to tell my mom because she was very intuitive and psychic, so she knew something was wrong. So as soon as I said I don't want to go up there anymore, she said, "Okay, you don't have to. It's fine. You don't have to go up there anymore." And interesting thing, I had 2 playmates, invisible playmates at the time that I would play with. And one was named John and the other was named Johnny. Well, John, I also called him Big Bad John, was an adult, and Johnny was a little kid. And I always thought it was weird that I had these invisible playmates. I guess that's weird enough, but maybe a lot of kids do. But one of them is a kid and one's an adult. Well, now I know. I did a hypnotic regression, so I had conscious memories and I also had recovered memories. I know now that Big Bad John was also an alien that was kind of watching over me, that had been assigned by the guy, the bluish, you know, the tall, bluish gray man alien. So that was my first encounter. I had some memories of it, some conscious memories, and when I did the hypnotic regression with Yvonne Smith, it all came back. And just for confirmation with that neighbor up there, my brother was at a Sons of Norway meeting several years ago, and he met that bad man's wife's sister. And he mentioned to her, he said, "Well, we haven't seen those people, those neighbors, you know, where are they? What's going on with them?" And her sister said, "Oh, we don't talk to them. He turned out to be a child molester." And my brother was horrified. And then he told me that, and oh, well, this all makes sense, you know. why I wasn't supposed to go there, and what he was doing in that closet then became pretty obvious. So.
Now, did you have any further experiences with this being, this bluish being?
Yeah, I put it all together now because I didn't know what his name was. In 1997, I had a very powerful vision of him. Now I know it's the same guy. He referred to himself as the Progenitor. So one of my stories I talk about in the second book, I think, Timeless Deja Vu, I talk about the Progenitor. And when I saw him, he had a different shape. I mean, he was still tall, but he was like rotating in space, and he had more of a proto-human look. You know, I guess that proto-human kind of look, you know, facial hair and long hair or whatever, and kind of a long, thin nose. And he told me that I was a seer. That's the word he used, a seer, and that was going to be my mission. And then he told me about, he gave me a lesson on cosmology, this idea that, one universe fits into another, that, what goes into a black hole here comes out in another dimension as a quasar or whatever. He explained all this stuff, and I wrote it all down. It didn't make a whole lot of sense to me because I had to do some research about it. But the bottom line was that he was telling me that he's making contact with me, and that he was the original, the Progenitor, which means the first. And so I remember I wrote all this down, and I drew a picture of him and everything, but I didn't tell anybody, except it was in 1999. I had a colleague of mine, anthropology professor, and I showed her the picture that I'd drawn, and I told her about the Progenitor, and her response was, "You're a pretty spacey dude, Bruce." And so then I said, okay, well, that's not the reaction I was looking for. So maybe it's not time yet to tell my stories, because if she's going to give me a hard time about this, how am I going to tell her about everything else? So I kind of kept it in my back pocket. And then after my friend Gene died, I started doing a lot of meditative walks where I would connect to those in the spirit world. And I decided I was going to try to connect to the Progenitor. And I did recently, about a year and a half ago, I guess it was. And now I have regular contact with him. And now I know his name is, because I asked what his real name is, and he said it's Anzar, Anzar. And he is an ancient alien mystic, is what he is, and an advisor to me. So he gives me information. In fact, a year ago, he told me that there would be a series of calamities that would occur. And that was about a year ago. He warned me, and he said, it's time to get ready, time to prepare. And I said, well, when? Give me a date, because that's what you want to know. I want to predict, And he said, I can't tell you an exact date, because he said, predictions are often wrong, but preparations are never wrong. Which is true, it's really, there's too many variables. So I asked him recently, when all this stuff happened that's going on right now, I said, is this the calamity you talked about? And he says, this is the first of 7. And then I go, oh, great. 1 of 7. And then I asked for more information, and he said he'll give me more information as time goes on. So I'm not in the business of predicting. I'm in the business of helping people prepare. And I think that's the wise thing to do. It's always best to be prepared. And I know some people that, like when I do, a couple of times a lot of times people ask me, can you connect to my dead relative? And usually I can, as long as that dead relative wants to connect with somebody. If they don't want to, be connected, it's hard to do it, but obviously it's impossible. But one time I did this for a lady, and I gave her information, and she said, well, I don't know, it's not very accurate. You said that I'm just using a different name. You said that he said his name was Big Bob, but he never went by that name. And I said, okay, well, he was Bob Sr., and there is a Bob Jr., my brother. I said, well, doesn't that be Big Bob? I mean, sometimes the information doesn't come through like you and I are talking. It's more symbolic, so you don't always get the exact wording right. And then I mentioned something about spaghetti, and she said, well, he didn't like spaghetti, but last night my mom and I were eating spaghetti and talking about him. I said, okay. And there were a couple other things that were pretty close, and she just discounted the whole thing because it wasn't exactly perfect. And that's the problem with predictions. Preparations are never bad, but predictions can be wrong, or they can, be partly true. But a lot of people expect, with the paranormal, they expect perfection. They say, well, I'm not going to believe it unless you give me exact time and date and exact description of what's going to happen and what's going to happen to me. Well, there's too many variables for that. The fact that you get any information should be remarkable enough. It's like, where's this coming from? I'm not making it up. I actually am talking to this person that was your father or was your uncle or whatever. And but it's amazing. People expect, I think because of Hollywood movies and Harry Potter and all that, they expect everything to be at that scale when it's actually more subtle. Sometimes it can be very profound, but oftentimes it's very subtle. And like all the experiments that are done with psychokinesis and telepathy, the results are always greater than chance. They always show that it's greater than chance, but most people are expecting perfection. Well, it has to be right every single time. Otherwise, I don't believe it. And they don't stop to think, how could it even be right at all unless it was real? So anyway, that's just some of the stuff that I've encountered over the past 4 years. And I actually enjoy skeptics though, because it's a challenge, and I don't get into arguments with them. I just said, well, as my friend Gene says, experience is believing and believing is experience. Because once you have the experience, you believe it, and then when you believe it, you're open to more, and then until you get to the next threshold, more stuff happens, you believe that, and then you go to the next step. And I don't think there's ever an end to it. Yeah. Because we're just scratching the surface,
I would agree. Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about this being Anzar.
Yes.
Has he given you any more recent information about these calamities or anything unfolding right now?
Yeah, he's been very helpful. Very early on, based on what he was telling me, I switched to online classes several days before the college said we were going to do it. And I talked to my boss and I said, I have a feeling that we shouldn't be having contact with, I had contact with 90 students a day. And in a classroom where there's 5 other classes going on throughout the day. So all this is going on. Nobody's cleaning anything. Nobody's, safeguarding anything. Or being safe about anything. So I said, I'm just going to switch to online. She said, I understand. That's fine. Because he had told me that this was coming. So I knew, I had an inkling that this was the calamity he was speaking of. And I even mentioned it on Facebook, I don't know, about 2 weeks ago. I mentioned it because I'm starting to share in a more, obviously on radio shows, but on social media as well. And I'm getting attacked by people, not by a lot of people, but, significant number of internet trolls. And I remember I said that this was the first of, several calamities. And this one guy wrote, oh, this doesn't qualify as a calamity. And that was 2 weeks ago. So people are it's just so unbelievable. I think that's probably what it is, that they're frightened and they don't want to believe it until it happens to them. And but I'll tell you this, what I got today, this is really hot off the presses or whatever. Actually, it was yesterday. I was told by Gene and by Anzar, they told me, we are coming. And I said, that sounds kind of ominous. What does that mean? We are coming. So I asked for clarification today, and they said that the spirits, the alien beings, what they called gods and angels, are coming to us to help us. But they also said that the demons and the corruptors, I think they were called, are also working against it. And they said it was kind of what they would consider a battle for the earth. That's what they told me, which is pretty scary stuff, apocalyptic stuff. But I think, and I don't say that to frighten listeners or anybody, it's for preparation. It's like, take it seriously. You know, that's what when I speak to Anzar lately, he's telling me, you have to take this seriously. And then they told me, they said, we are coming. I take comfort in that, actually, even though they said that, you know, there's these bad forces, because I think those of us that have had these experiences know there are entities that are not good, and there are entities that are good, or that are helpful and not helpful. There's some that are neutral too. But it's comforting to me that they're there with us, and they're trying to help us. And so part of my job, I think, part of my mission is to help people understand the gravity of the situation, and to realize there's a spiritual element to this. It's not just what's going on in the physical world. There's also something beyond that, and you got to look through the veil to really be able to understand it, that there's more than what meets the eye, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Now,
the deeper threat.
Speaking of these malevolent spirits, demons, what, based on your understanding, can you explain what is a demon based on your research? Is it a lower vibrational entity? Was it once a human spirit? Is it something older? There's so many different theories and different understandings of what a demon is. Help us understand through your research.
Yeah, and my personal experience. You know, when you lead a paranormal life, you don't always make the right decisions because you don't understand it. I've now learned that you don't mess around with things you don't understand. And if something doesn't seem right, run the other way. I mean, that's just the way it is. But I've had a couple of experience with demonic entities. I'll give you an example, a very frightening one that I wrote about in Timeless Trinity. I was, after an appearance on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie, a lot of people contacted me, you know, and some of them were, you know, nice people, and some of them were kind of, you know, a little bit out there, and they need help, you know, a couple of people. But there was one guy who called, he got a hold of me. He was a film producer, and he said, well, it sounds like you got a lot of psychic abilities, so I'd like to test your psychic abilities. I took that as a challenge, you know. I'm a competitive person. I played sports and stuff, and I just kind of competitive. So, okay, you know, and he said, I'll fly you out to Chicago. What do you say? I'll fly you out to Chicago and I'll test you. I'll take you to different paranormal sites. And let's see, I won't tell you anything. You see what you can pick up. You know, I know what happened there, but you may not know. You don't know. So I said, fine, I'll do that. And so it was a matter of, it's a cautionary tale. And this is a cautionary tale. So I went there filled with pride. You know, I'm going to show this guy what I can do, you know, and I'm going to get on his, you know, documentary or whatever he's going to do. And he was a nice guy and everything, but he took me to the south side of Chicago, and we pulled into this Aldi's parking lot of all places, you know, that German store, that I guess grocery store or whatever. And I got out of the car, and I immediately looked around, and I started to see a vision of like 1880s, 1890s, you know, the horse and buggies, people in dark clothing. Everybody's moving around. They were not paying attention to me, and I was just observing all this frantic movement. But there was one guy right in front of me, probably about 20 yards away, with a bowler hat, dark, menacing eyes, a kind of one of those curly mustaches, big mustache, kind of curled up at the ends. He had a dark coat on, and he was just staring at me. And it was really scary. I mean, that guy scared me. And but everybody else was moving, but he was paying attention to me. So then that went away. And I said, okay, there's something going on here. So I started walking around, and usually what I do is I go up and touch a tree or some old, very old object, because I feel like it retains some kind of memory or energy. And I was about to touch this tree in this alleyway behind the Aldi's parking lot. And I went to touch it, and I was driven to the ground. And when I say driven to the ground, I mean by incredible force to the ground and down on my knees, and I could not get up. And it says a lot because to have that happen, because I'm 6'3", about 260 pounds. I'm a big person, you know, almost like an NFL size, you know. So that took a lot of force to do that, but there was nobody there. It was an invisible force, and it drove me into the ground. I injured my foot, I injured my knee. And the worst part of it is when I was being driven into the ground and held down, I had this vision of people in a dungeon, and it was men, women, and children. They were being tortured. They were being asphyxiated. They were crying out in pain. And I just lost it. It was frightening, and I lost almost my will to live. It's like I just was giving up. And I thought, and then I caught myself, and I go, what? This is not right. I can get up. I can get up. So I got myself up. And the guy wasn't filming, but he was recording. He had me mic'd up. And he said, what the heck's going on? And I told him, and he said, well, I feel funny. You know, I said, there's something wrong. I said, yeah, there's something wrong here. Let's get out of here. I don't want to be here. So we got into his car. And as we were driving away, I said, don't ever take me to a place like that again. Because the only hint he gave me is that it's rather dark here. That's all he said. So I said, don't ever take me to a place like that. I said, what is this place? And he said, well, that's the site of the Murder Hotel, which was the hotel that H.H. Holmes, Dr. H.H. Holmes had built for the Chicago World's Fair. And he had maybe murdered 300 people in that structure, where he had dungeons and he had torture rooms and you know, where he killed all these people. And he was probably America's first serial killer. And I think there was a book written, the most definitive book's called Devil in the White City, I think is what the book to recommend to any listeners about H.H. Holmes. But he's been on the subject of many documentaries and stuff. But that's what it was. It was the demonic spirit that either drove him to do what he did, or it was him in a very negative demonic type spirit energy. So the cautionary tale is there. You know, I went there to try to impress this guy. So I let my radar dish up, and my defenses were down, and I was trying to pick up and everything, try to impress this guy, my own hubris, right, my own pride. And I got slammed. I got bushwhacked. I got whatever you want to call it, you know, psychically and physically, and injured. So this stuff is nothing to play around with. The darker side of this stuff is nothing to play around with. You got to protect yourself. You got to be careful. And when people say, oh, let's go in there because there's supposedly some kind of demon in this house or something, I'm not going in there. There's no reason for me to go in there. I'm going to feel it. I'm going to feel it psychically. I'm going to feel it physically, and I don't want that. I just do what I do with protection and safety, and that's fine with me because I know what can happen. So anyway, that was my experience with a demonic entity. Now, whether it was the thing that drove him, which I don't know, which would, in my view, this kind of thing never had been human, this demon, this demonic entity, or it was his demonic spirit. I don't know which it was, or some combination, but I think there are, you know, terrible people that get stuck, and they don't ascend, they don't go anywhere, they get stuck wherever they are. And, you know, he's still murdering people and hurting people psychically, you know, and physically in that location. And if you look around that location, south side of Chicago, all these people are walking around and they have no idea what was there because people don't understand history. They don't understand what was there. And they all look so depressed, and the whole area is depressed, and there's graffiti all over, and I'm sure there's gang activity there. It's a horribly depressing place. And these poor people who live there probably have no clue why their lives are so miserable. I think that's part of it.
What do you do now to kind of protect yourself against any kind of spiritual attack or something like that?
Yeah, well, first, I don't let my pride get in the way. I don't have to demonstrate to anybody. I don't have to, you know, so that was why it's a cautionary tale. The other thing is I make very sure that when I open up my psychic radar dish and open to the world, you know, I have protection. I have my spirit guides. I also, you know, I pray, and I appeal to God, and so I think whatever method people want, whatever means the most to them, get that protection set up. And if you have a spirit guide, like I have two of them, they can protect me and keep the bad entities out so they don't creep in and try to do something. So that's what I've learned. So when you turn it on, you got to have protection. You can't just be open to whatever's out there, because I learned my lesson. You can't do that. You're just setting yourself up for some kind of disaster, or getting some kind of even at the least, you're going to get some kind of energy sucking entity that's going to attach itself to you, and you're going to start feeling run down, and you can't sleep, and you have to be really careful with that stuff, and cleanse yourself after you have this mediumship. Make sure that you don't drag any of those entities into your home, so you have to be very, very careful.
Now, you have communication with spirits that give you information,
Yeah.
Possibly, interdimensional, extraterrestrials, whatever you want to call them. Do you also have any other precognitive psychic abilities? Have you ever had any just information about future events or anything just pop into your head, something like that?
Yeah, I will tell you, and I wasn't the only one, but like the morning of 9/11, before 9/11 happened, I was back east. I was on the Norfolk Naval Base, and we were on a tour, and we were staying in the military hotel, a Navy hotel right there on the base. And I had a terrible nightmare that morning, and the nightmare was where everything was falling apart. The ground was shaking. The mountains the hills were crumbling. There were tsunamis. There were just all these things happening at one time. The whole world was just falling apart. And I woke up in a cold sweat, and I remember I told my friends that I was with, my two colleagues, and then we just kind of put it aside, and then we went about our day on a tour of the base, and then sure enough, 9/11 happened. And we got locked down for like 6 hours on the base, and we didn't know whether the base was going to be attacked or whatever. We couldn't get through to our families. I found out through IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, that researched this. There were literally hundreds of thousands of people around the world who had a very similar precognitive dream about that event. Now, people like Dr. Dean Radin, who's probably the world's preeminent parapsychologist and researcher, and he's the chief scientist at IONS in Petaluma, California. He said that there are other people who've written about it too, backwards causality. If something is really terrible, some of that precognitive stuff you pick up in the signal line in the spirit world could be an event that's so terrible that it goes backwards in time and gives you clues that it's going to happen, because it is so, because in the quantum world, there is no past and future. It's all the eternal now. If you tap into that, you can tap into the fact that something terrible is going to happen. If it's just a minor event, it might be harder to pick up on because it's not going to be as noisy, if that makes sense. Whereas something, it's kind of like a loud boom versus a little noise, And I think that backward causality causes, going backwards in time, in our linear time, will cause us to pick up on it. And I think that's what happened with 9/11. I think that's what happened with this calamity. I'll call it a calamity because it is, that we're going through. And I think that even if I didn't have contact with Anzar or these others, I might have had precognitive dreams, although I have been feeling very restless for the last couple months, and not just me, but a lot of my friends as well who are tied into this stuff. And we were just thinking, that there's going to be something. And I said, well, a year ago I was told there would be something, but I didn't know exactly when. And then this happened. So, I've had precognition, and it can be a very frightening thing. And of course, if you act on everything, like if you went around and said, okay, I had this precognitive dream that this is going to happen, well, maybe it won't happen exactly like that. So what's better is if you get an inkling about something, just to do some kind of, even if it's a minor preparation, do something. that's why 6 months ago I bought a generator, and I bought extra food I stored. Now at the time, my wife Ginger, she's not. I'm not going to say she's a skeptic, but she's kind of she's very supportive, but not exactly on board totally with this stuff. And it was kind of a tough sell for her. Why are you buying this big thing of rice? Why are you buying a generator? And I said, well, I don't, I want to prepare. I want to be prepared. And so I think preparations are never wrong. I think but predictions often can be wrong, but sometimes they're right.
Now, going back to beings that exist
Mhm.
beyond the spectrum of our vision, in the beginning we talked briefly about angels and how you think your first experience may
Mhm.
have involved an angelic being.
Mhm.
What is your understanding of angels? Are these celestial entities? Are they extraterrestrials? Are they something more? Are they something more powerful than we can understand? What's your understanding of angels?
Uh, I don't think they've ever been human, as far as I know. At least my spirit guide Theodora, I don't think she's ever been human. So she is a celestial being of some type. Whether that would be considered an extraterrestrial, perhaps it could. I will tell you this: my friend Gene, who I mentioned, who's kind of started this whole thing for me recently, he told me, he said, remember, we are the aliens. And at first I thought, well, what does that mean? Does that mean like you are like the people in the spirit world? You guys are really the aliens, and that's that's who people are seeing? Or like we all are, And then what I've come to understand is that we're all connected. That's what he meant. And I had one spirit that I got in contact with that said, where you are in your physical realm, but in a different reality, you are the ghosts. So you might be occupying the same space, but in a different continuum. So what we see as ghosts running around are actually in their world, they may think that they have a reality too, and we're the ghosts. So, who knows for sure? I don't think anybody knows for sure. We catch these little glimpses. We all get a little piece of the puzzle. And what we need to do is all put our puzzle pieces together. It's like a giant 3,000, 5,000 piece puzzle, and you can't just look at one thing. Oh, I get it. I understand it. You got to try to share and put it all together and work together, and then we can see the bigger picture.
Have you
But that's
ever
what I think. That's what I think about angels, and that's been my experience anyway.
have you ever had any experience with cryptid beings such as like Bigfoot, dogmen, things such as that, or done any research on it? Because I believe that that's also connected very much with this entire phenomenon.
Yeah, I have had a Bigfoot experience, and I had another cryptid experience, some kind of a wolf-like creature when I was younger. I used to hang out in graveyards when I was a kid, which should give you an indicator that there was something unusual about me. I think my parents realized it right away. But I would drag my little friends with me, and we'd go to the local graveyard. It's about a mile away from my house. And we would ride our bikes there, and we'd make a lunch, and like a brown bag lunch, we'd bring it there, and we'd go to the oldest, creepiest part of the graveyard. We'd sit there and eat our lunch. And my brother told me that if you went on the other side of the road to where the mortuary was and where they had the crematorium, that there was a dirt road that went down to this pond. And him and his teenage friends used to go down there and I guess smoke cigarettes and drink beer or whatever teenagers were doing. And he told me about that place, and I told my little friends, well, we got to go down there one day. So we went down there through the woods, kind of winding through the woods, got to this thing. I call it a swamp pond. There's all these big tall trees with heavy growth, like moss and stuff on them. And the pond was filled with lily pads, and it was really dark there because the forest was surrounding it. And we heard some noises when we were down there this one time. We heard noises on the other side of the swamp pond. and like crashing noises, breaking sticks and sticker bushes, and I said, boy, that sounds like a pretty big animal over there. Maybe we should get out of here. And my friend said, yeah, let's get out of here. So he took off on his bike. And these old bikes that we had, the chains were always falling off, you know, especially when you were in a hurry. So my chain fell off and this thing kept coming. You know, I heard it crashing, coming on our side of the pond. And finally I got the chain on and we took off, and I got up towards the top and I was able to look back. And it was kind of in the late afternoon. So it was there was like a fog setting in. It was this weird kind of fogginess. And I saw this creature, and it looked like a wolf, but it was taller. And so I figured it was like a wolf, half man, wolf man, or whatever. I don't know what it was. Either that or it was the biggest dog and tallest dog I've ever seen, like a wolfhound or something. And it was on its hind legs, and it was by these crypts, you know, these concrete crypts that they used to line graves with. There was like a pile of them there, and it was near that. And I just said, just keep going. And that was I think I was 8 years old, and we never went back to that pond. I don't know what that creature was. Somebody who listened to me tell the story said maybe it was a bear. And I said, well, it could have been, I guess, but it looked more like a wolf to me, or wolf type creature. And then the Bigfoot story was in Oric, in Northern California. We were driving, we're almost in Oric, which is in the redwoods there in Northern California. And my wife Ginger was sleeping, and I was driving. And as I was going around this corner in this very dark, redwoods on both sides, and it was nighttime, so it was just pitch black. As I was heading around, the headlights caught this thing on the side of the road. Right on the edge of the pavement, and it's only a 2-lane highway, so it's narrow. And this thing was hairy, and it was huge. It was maybe at least 7 feet tall, but it was wearing a hat, which I thought was weird. So at first I thought, why is somebody standing there on the side of the road? And they're like halfway onto the road too, with cars speeding by. That'd be the stupidest thing to do. You know, why would you do that? And as I went by, it was right there on the side of the road. And I just kept going, and I woke up Ginger and I said, I think I just saw Bigfoot. That thing was hairy. It looked like a giant ape, you know, but it had a hat on. And she said, no, that couldn't have been. I said, well, let's stop and we'll go back and I can show you. She said, no, just keep going, you know, because she wouldn't want to take a chance, right? So I said, well, maybe we can stop. You know, I was getting tired, and I said, why don't we stop in Oric? We can find a hotel. And she said, no, you just keep driving. So we kept driving. Well, I found out that that where I saw that was not far, I think less than 10 miles away from where that famous Bigfoot video is from. I forgot the name of the guy who did the video, but everybody's seen it. You know, walking, you know, kind of ambling along in the forest. It was probably 8 miles away from that location. So there are more sightings in that area, I think, than any place in the world. And so that was my experience. Now, I remember that comedian, I forgot his name. He died of a drug overdose. He's very funny. I wish I could remember his name, but he said, people ask, why is it always that the pictures, the videos they have of Bigfoot are blurry, you know? And then he said, I got an idea. Maybe it's because he is blurry, you know? And then I thought, that's kind of a cool idea, because what if he's phasing in and phasing out? What if it's not just what we think it is? What if it's an interdimensional kind of thing? So I wish I could remember that comedian's name, but anyway.
I think I know who you're talking about. I think
it's kind of long hair.
Mitch something, I think.
Yeah, Mitch Hedberg.
Yeah,
Mitch
okay,
Hedberg.
that's what it was. Yeah. That guy was funny. Now, with this phenomenon, I find it fascinating, especially there's one place, you've probably heard of Skinwalker Ranch.
Yes.
I've had quite a few guests that I've had the current superintendent on. I've had other researchers on to talk about it. I find the place fascinating because there's such a concentration of this phenomenon, and everything is there, from Bigfoot, cryptids, UFOs, aliens.
Yeah.
It's just such a concentrated place. It seems like the energy there is off the charts.
Right. No, I've never been there. In a way, it would be interesting to go there, but in another way, I would have to be really, really prepared. And I certainly don't want to be trying to impress some film producer if I was going there. I would just go there very carefully, quietly on my own, and just be able to make a quick exit. I had some friends who went to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. They went to a conference there, and they had every kind of experience you can imagine at that. It's a very magical place, and of course, it has a very terrible, tragic history. At Wounded Knee. That's where Wounded Knee is. And but they had, the medicine men there said that they have Bigfoot sightings all the time. And they also have their space brothers, as they call them, rather than aliens. So there's just certain places that attract this kind of energy, or maybe there's a portal or something. I don't know what the official term would be, but there seems to be some places where that the barrier between the worlds is much thinner and much more permeable, let's say, or semi-permeable. And I think that's probably what's happening. And what's his name? Whitley Strieber, right? Wrote Communion, that big bestseller. He came out with a book called A New World, and I listened to it on tape, books on tape or audiobook. And he was talking about how the alien, the extraterrestrials, or visitors as he calls them, can see a glow about people who have had experiences and can connect with them, and they choose you. It's like they'll see all these people, they can see what's going on, right? But they'll see certain people with some kind of glow. I call it a radar dish, but maybe it's a glow, like he says. And I think they hone in on you and they say, okay, this person we can contact. And I think it's not only people, but it's locations, like you said, for whatever reason. Skinwalker Ranch is probably that place. There's a glow about it. There's a rip in space-time continuum, whatever it is, and they can hone in on it, and that's why they're attracted to it. That's my theory. I don't know for sure, but I think that's might be what it is.
Now, in closing tonight, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. It seems that the ancients had an amazing connection to this phenomenon, whatever it is that's on the other side of our spectrum of vision. They had a connection with these beings, communication. They seem to understand it so much more than we do.
Right.
Do you think that in our lifetime that we will have a level of understanding possibly that the ancients had, and maybe even communication with the other side on the same level?
Well, I tend to be optimistic, even though I said some things that sound like they're going to be pretty bad, but I'm optimistic that we will come out of the other side okay. That, not unscathed, but we will come out of the other side okay. And one of the lessons we have to learn is our interconnectedness. And in our modern world, we have forgotten a lot of what the ancients knew, the wisdom that they had, whether it's the Native Americans or any of the indigenous people. We have, the Aborigines in Australia. We have set that aside as superstition, and that's just of the old world, and it's, magical thinking or whatever the technical term is. But what a great world it would be if we had our scientific world and our ancient world wisdom melded together into a hybrid of understanding of where we are in the universe. And I think then we can ascend, then we can move to the next level, and then all these nagging problems that we have can probably be solved, because we'll realize that none of that other stuff matters. That what really matters is our connection to each other, our connection to everything, our connection to the universe. As when you study quantum physics, you see that everything is connected. And it's an illusion that we see as everything being separate. And once you realize that, I think that opens you up to the next experience. So I tend to be optimistic.
Well, I think that's the best way to be, especially in the times we're facing right now.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
have to stay optimistic. And
Yes.
Bruce, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Before you head out, let everyone know where they can find your books, website,
Yeah.
social media, anything like that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for inviting me, Chris. BruceOlavSolheim.com. So my first name, Bruce. Olav is my middle name, OLAV. Solheim, SOLHEIM.com. Or Amazon. Just go to Amazon, look up Bruce Solheim. You'll find my timeless books. And if you go to my website, you can also see my Snark comic book, which is another thing I did recently, also with an alien theme. So it's kind of fun, all ages comic book, whole other story in and of itself. But that's where you can find me. I'm on Facebook too. You could find me there. So, and Twitter, I guess.
Well, thank you so much, Bruce. We're going to have you back on in the future, and
Thank
have
you,
an
Chris.
excellent night.
Have you ever had Terry Lovelace on?
I've actually contacted him this week for a show.
Good. He's my good friend.
Yeah,
he's a good guy.
I'd love to have him on. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
I'll give him a good word about you.
Definitely.
Okay.
All right. Well, you have a good one.
Good night. Take care.